Our next speaker is Dr. Fraser Labrom. He's an Orthopaedic Principal House Officer at Brisbane's Queen Elizabeth II Hospital. He's completed a concurrent Master of Philosophy throughout his MD at the University of Queensland. He remains actively involved in spine trauma arthroplasty research across multiple sites such as Queensland Children's Hospital, Jameson Trauma Institute, and Metro South Hospital and Health Service. Dr. Labrom will highlight key stepwise milestones to target as you pursue a surgical career. So look forward to hearing from him.
Thanks very much, Harrison, and the rest of the ASA team just for having me tonight. And also big thanks to both Josh and Aashray for their wonderful talks. I think I was even jotting down some notes as we went along. So thank you guys. I was going to take a punt on actually doing this slightly differently, and I'm glad that I have done this way. I feel like Josh and Aashray have really given a great holistic overview on really how to target your CV as well as your career progression from a really big, broad picture sort of look. How I've decided to just discuss building a CV tonight is actually using a case study. And it actually does really reflect both what Josh and Aashray have really been discussing, and that's actually using your goals to then, I suppose, design how you want to really implement your targets for your CV. And so I come from an orthopedic background, so I wanted to use trying to get onto the orthopedic training program as a bit of a case study, but I will at certain points bring it back to other surgical specialties, and I'll certainly give a really sort of break it down sort of year by year and what I would recommend for the medical student years and also the junior doctor years as well. Before I kick off, I do want to say a big thanks to Dr. Sam Scaife, who is actually now a post-fellowship exam trainee, who has given me a lot of points that I'll discuss tonight. I felt like it would be a bit rich, me coming up saying this is how you get on the orthopedic training program without myself being on the training program. So full credit there. So firstly, why would you do orthopedics or why would you do surgery? Very similar to what the guys have already outlined today. It is just an innovative field that has this massive amount of technology that is truly groundbreaking when it comes to the surgical specialties. But at the same time, it is a wonderful and well-supported subspecialty where you really get to work with your hands. And a lot of people talk about, wanting to do surgery because I want to work with my hands and do procedural tasks. And I think orthopedics is truly the best example of that. You get your hands on patients, you examine them, it's tactile, and you also, of course, put in sort of incredible surgeries together where it's big and open, you can see lots of things, and that's why I think it's quite amazing. And we really do achieve great outcomes for patients. They sort of tout the hip replacement as the most beloved surgery outside of a cataract insertion, so the intraocular lens for cataracts. It is a wonderful specialty, and I would certainly recommend it to the majority of people. Now, my advice for building your CV when it comes to everything, but certainly with orthopedics, is knowing your destination and really then having a map on how to get to that destination. When it comes to the orthopedic timeline, and this can really be extrapolated to the vast majority of surgical subspecialties, is to acknowledge that this is a long process. And I think that is not a surprise, having heard about what Josh and Aashray have really been talking about, as acknowledging this is a long game. For my own personal side of the timeline, I was a first year medical student in 2019. I didn't graduate until 2022, and I will acknowledge that I'm not going to be a consultant at the earliest. I didn't actually adjust the 2028 there, but until about 2032. Really, my junior doctor years and even up to the end of my registrar years are going to likely take me over 10 years. And that's really, I think, to double down on the point that Aashray was making, where your choices that you make now will compound over time. And I think sending up really good foundations can be very important in achieving long-term goals. While you really want to have a CV that looks as impressive as Josh and Aashray's now, acknowledging that, it's going to take time at the start, but really start sort of spinning the flywheel as you go through with time is something to acknowledge. The other thing to, I suppose, go hand in hand with that is acknowledging, because this is going to take time, find a way to enjoy it. Find a way to have a really good time and make the most of just enjoying the day to day. Because if you don't enjoy the day to day, this will be certainly be a bit of a drag. So I wanted to highlight about orthopedics on how it is competitive, and this is the same for all surgical specialties, and I'll get to sort of a breakdown of other surgical specialties in a moment. But I think at the moment, people will refrain from pursuing some surgical specialties because they feel like it is unobtainable. It is too difficult to get onto neurosurgery. It is too difficult to get onto plastic surgery. Unfortunately, it's competitive everywhere. We are just in a competitive landscape. But as some good mentors have once told me, there's always room for people at the top. If you are good enough, you deserve to be at the top and you will get there. But having said that, though, as a real life example, last year for the Queensland applicants, there were in total 140 orthopaedic PHOs, which about half of them applied to training. Once they got through to the final interview rounds, there was about 2/3 of those, and ultimately only 18 got on. Now, that's actually a massive intake for the orthopedics. The year prior to that was 6. So just to acknowledge that this is a hard game, but I don't think it's impossible. I really do think it is achievable and it is attainable. And I think with well thought out preparation to your approach to any surgical training program, I think you can be part of those numbers on the right-hand side of the screen. So in terms of orthopedics, what do you need to get on? And I'm going to use these to then influence about what I would recommend to then build your CV. So in orthopedics, the minimum requirement, bare minimum, is that you've done 6 months at a PGY 3 level. That's easy. But it also acknowledges that the earliest that you can apply is PGY 4. Now, I think that's a really important factor because you acknowledge that then if I'm not going to apply until PGY 4, I've got 4 years of medical school and at the very least, 3 years of being a junior doctor to accumulate all of this experience that I can then use to apply with. The other side of things is the GSSE, and I'll talk to you about the GSSE and I think why it's really important to just knock it on the head and get it out of the way. And then for orthopedics, we've got to do this radiation safety course because we use a lot of x-rays in our operating. When it comes to orthopedics, the way that it's broken down is you start out with in a phase where you have a CV. Now the CV is purely a hurdle. You just have to hit a minimum score of points and then you progress on. And then after you've submitted that CV and you progress on to the next stage, you then sit a multiple choice question. And that's really just a reflection on how well do you know the specialty. And then from there, you start getting broken down by things such as an interview and a verbal referee report. Now, while that is really, at the end of the day, communication-based, it oftentimes draws from your experiences, the things that you've built your own CV up. And that's why I think your CV actually is something worth investing in, because it's not just a hurdle. It's not just something that you get through. It's something to really actually put time and effort into. This is really not needed unless you're super interested in orthopedics, but just acknowledging that, when you do apply, it's a big process. There's multiple milestones and you've just got to tick them off one by one. In terms of the CV scoring system for orthopedics, and then I'll show you what it looks like for other surgical specialties in a moment. But really, in orthopedics, we have reduced our emphasis on the CV. You get a small amount of points for attending those RACS-based courses that Josh had mentioned. You get a very small points for just attending a national ASM. But I think quite pertinently to know is that you do get points for things like an HDR, like a PhD or a master's. And there are certainly lots of points available for publishing research as well as presenting them at conferences as well. And if I had to sort of invest in anything when it comes to my CV, I certainly would echo what Aashray said in that you need to invest in research. I know that a lot of people don't want to hear that, but unfortunately that's just the state of play in 2025, and I imagine it will only double down from here on out. The other final thing, of course, you can get with points is just your overall experience, and it's just paying homage to the people who do put a lot of time and effort into their time at work. And I have titled this about the CV scoring system about 6 points and then put it in the bin. And that's true for getting onto the program and progressing through to the next stage. But I think what's important to note is that when you go to the next stage, which is about the interview and the verbal referee reports in orthopedics, they really, in orthopedics, refers back to the foundational competencies that is about the AOA training program. And these core competencies of communication, teamwork, professionalism, leadership, advocacy, and education and research, all of those things, when you're being asked questions by senior colleagues, they don't ask you about, the actual how do I deal with this fracture. They ask about all the things from your CV. And while you might max out those points on that CV application, the more you have and the more you've invested into interesting things of your CV, the more you'll be able to talk about in these areas in those later stages. And that's why I think that it's not unreasonable to actually continue on building up your career as you go through. You don't just need to hit the 6 points and drop it. I would still hit the 6 points and keep shooting higher for as long as you can. I wanted to highlight how it looks across all the surgical specialties, just for people, of course, who weren't interested in orthopedics and, have probably gone to sleep in my talk already. I wanted to highlight, firstly, the minimum selection requirements. From what I've seen, and I've gone through pretty much all of the surgical specialty application processes, the minimum that you need to do is PGY3 time in the job and also have passed the GSSE. All of them seem to have this first phase about, contacting maybe some referees, building a CV, and then certainly afterwards they then progress on to an interview. I certainly echo everything else that, both the ASA team as well as Josh and Aashray have mentioned, but going to the RACS website, finding a surgical subspecialty that you're keen on, even if it's 3 or 4 of them, if you still haven't decided, and having a look at these breakdowns, having an understanding of where you're going in the future is really important. And I've done that really here. So I've broken on the left-hand side down what is the percentage of the 100% to get onto these programs weighted in terms of CV, your referee reports, and then the interview, plus or minus some of them now are offering like a situational judgment test or an exam. But when I break down the actual points that are given for those CV, acknowledging just that, again, it's usually only about sort of somewhere between 10 to 30% of your overall application mark. The really ones that come out is that research in the form of papers and presenting those papers are the ones that are highly rated. And certainly, as Aashray was saying, these can be not recycled, but I suppose redesigned. So you can use the same sort of research. One part of research can be done for your presentation, one can be a poster, one is truly a publication, and all of those things branch off and you can just accumulate those points to build your CV with time. And that's why I really do think research is important. And of course, thankfully, they do acknowledge time in the game, time actually doing the job, and most surgical specialties will acknowledge that as well. I haven't highlighted it here, but certainly with that research, the other side of things that they do give points to quite often is doing those high degrees in research. So I'd also recommend that too. So here is the point where I wanted to give a this is how I did it. This is what I would do if I could give a real life case study example on how I would target from an early medical student timeline all the way up until the point that I'm going to apply. Firstly, stage 1, and this is sort of very similar to what Aashray was saying at the conclusion of his talk there, is that I would recommend you setting up research early. If you haven't done so already, it would be taking things like emailing departments, you can talk to uni lecturers, or considering those things such as your higher degrees. All of those things will feel really slow. Those uni lecturers won't reply to you for a week. The email departments will probably come back and say, oh, look, I don't have an opportunity for you now, but come back another time. Just keep trying. Eventually the dam will break and eventually you will get through. And I have confidence that if you are, again, really wanting to pursue this, you will find something that will work. I think it is easier than ever to find a research project, and with all the amount of information that's available to us, coming up with a very simple question is all you need. I also recommend, as you develop that research, to start applying to present to national meetings. Now, I've highlighted the orthopaedic meetings as being, I'm from Queensland, but the Queensland AOA meetings, or the Brisbane sort of Queensland Orthopaedic Research Fund meetings, and also, of course, the national ASM, because those things will start ticking off points. And then certainly in orthopedics, there's no time minimum requirement for any of these things. Once you've done, it's in the bag, you can tick it off, and you just build it up from there. The one caveat that I have to that, and this really is unlikely to happen, is if again you're just ongoing, if you're ongoingly involved in research, is that it's good to have some sort of research saved close to the time of applying for your surgical specialty, just because oftentimes the same people that are going to be on your selection panel, the same people that are going to be on across from you on the interview table, are also going to be the same people at those meetings. And presenting them in the same year as those as your interview application is also really a good idea, because it's just, again, getting in front of those people and putting your face in front of them to remind them who you are. So that's it. You've set up your research. That's stage one. Stage two is, I really would recommend getting the GSSE out of the way early. For those that aren't familiar, the GSSE, or the General Surgical Sciences exam, is this, again, essentially a basic sciences examination on anatomy, physiology, and pathology. To be honest, I reckon most medical students in this chat would probably pass it better than I would right now, because it really is akin to more of your medical student knowledge than it is when you do start working. And that's why I think it's better to sit it early. If you've been studying really quite hard, try and sit it as soon as you can in intern year, because when you've got that fitness of studying for med school, you can then translate that into passing it when you're an intern. And once it's done, again, you've got the tick in the box. You never have to do it again. Most people recommend somewhere between about 3 to 6 months worth of dedicated preparation, depending on your other things going on in life. But it was something that I would certainly recommend, just trying to flag as soon as you're getting close to the end of med school, trying to think out in my roadmap, when do I want to sit it? What's the best thing for me? What works with my rotations? Just so you can have a plan to actually give it one good red hot crack. Also, the point being that it costs $5,000 to sit, and really you just want to sit it once. So the final thing with that GSSE preparation is acknowledging things like the resources that are available to you. Julie Mundy is a lady who used to be the head of Cardiothoracics at the Prince Charles Hospital here in Queensland. And she's a lady who actually provides practice exams for the GSSE. And all you have to do is email her, and she gives it to you for free. There's no cost involved. She sits it 3 months out of the exam and then another 3 weeks beforehand. And she is brutal, because she gives you some pretty brutal feedback, but also it's really good because she says, if you are not ready for the exam, you can maybe take some time before you do so, which I think is really invaluable advice for some people. The final things that you would definitely need to sit is the bank. The bank is a set of, honestly, thousands of past questions, but they always routinely end up on the exam. For my sitting, I counted about sort of 15% of the overall questions. And when the pass mark is only about 52% out of 100, having 15% of overall questions, just ones that you've already seen, are certainly a godsend. I personally really enjoyed the New Zealand company, which was Ace the Exam. You just put it into Google and you find it. It's really quite cheap at the end of the day. It's about $250. And there's, again, about 8,000 questions that you can do. And doing those together is a great way to finish and get through the GSSE. Regarding a CV point, I know of people who have been hired for junior surgical resident jobs or even PHO jobs purely on the basis that they've finished and passed the GSE rather than not. So it's one of those things that I would really try and get out of the way, have it on your CV. And it's something that people just acknowledge, being like, yep, you've put in the time. I recognize that you are someone who works hard. All right. Moving on. Stage 3. This is when you get in and you are a junior doctor. What do you do now? This is hard. This is possibly one of the biggest culture shocks that I experienced. But it's also important to continue, again, to build that CV and build your career. You want to be a good, hardworking team member at work, becoming a very competent and safe doctor, but you also want to try and do things that add to your CV. For orthopedics, doing things like, the RACS courses, which gets you points, but obviously provide some info for you, but also learning basic orthopedics. So there's a, big company in the orthopedic world called AO, and you can do those basic fracture courses about how to manage, fractures. I went up to Cairns and did it. It was excellent. And you can also do other things like the Ortho Bullets, paid courses as well, which I would highly recommend. I've added a little point here, and this is less about CV building, but just more about one thing, if I could give you a tip on about being a junior doctor, is about being a really good presenter when you're talking about cases to senior colleagues. If you can make a senior colleague's ears prick up by saying a really succinct, hard-hitting handover about a case that gets your point across about your things that you found, as well as your management plan in about sort of 3, 4, 5 sentences, they will think this person is someone that I want to keep around. And if I could offer you one sort of thing to focus on when you're a junior doctor, that would be my one recommendation. The final sort of thing, of course, is about really honing in on all of those things that you've done. Hopefully at that point, you've finalized a lot of the research you've done, you've been studying everything, you've added all to your orthopedic preparation, and then you get to finally start operating, you're learning on-call skills, and then really you're about to apply, and that's a pretty exciting stage 4. I put this one up at a recent sort of showcase day that we did for orthopedics recently, and it was funny, I gave this whole talk, and then this was the most popular slide, because I think it really just gives a real life example of what it looked like. And this is literally a screenshot from my OneNote of what I had planned back in the end of 2022 about what I wanted to do. I said, here are my goals. Here are those big ticket items, such as the points, the things that are going to get me points on my CV application. And also here are all the target conferences that I want to present at. And this is the time I'm going to do it. And I literally wrote this out as like a 5-year plan, and I continue to evolve upon that about where I'm going, what I'm doing. And it just gives you this really long range view of things to do. And what you can do with that information is not only make sure that you're not missing anything, but if you are identifying that you've got some maybe gaps in your CV, because you can see, look, in 5 years, if I get there, I haven't actually done these things because I haven't planned ahead of them, you can address that. You can use the information that you have at hand to, of course, kick all your goals, but also address all the weaknesses that you might identify along the way. So I would highly recommend to everyone who is keen on pursuing a surgical career to put something honestly as simple as this down to make sure that you're ticking all the basic boxes, so it's not something that you worry about right at the very end. I had just some very general CV sort of comments just to finish off. Whoops. And that is really that at the end of the day, this is a long journey, but it's also important to make sure that while you're building a CV, that you are a good doctor, you're a good person, and you're a good person that people want to work with. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to succeed in this field if you're someone who has the best CV in the world, but no one actually wants to spend a minute or have a bar with you at all. So make sure that you're a good person throughout all of this process, that you're not cutting people out from underneath them, and you're really just doing the best thing by you, and obviously all the best thing by your patients. You've got to be realistic with how long this will take. I really echo with what Josh and Aashray have said. I think this is a marathon. It's a cliche, but it is a marathon. It's not a sprint, and you need to make sure that all of the people in your support network are open and understanding of that. And then finally, everyone will hit a roadblock in this whole process. Everyone will understand that this is not going to go perfectly. You can have that 5-year plan written out in your OneNote, and you might not get on. Who knows? The poor people in the general surgery program, I think this year have got a very minimal intake just because they've expanded their surgery training program from rather than 4 years to 5 years. So all of a sudden, their very large intake has gone down to about 7. Things happen, that's out of your control, and you've just got to roll with the punches throughout all of that. At the end of the day, it's about being a good person, a good doctor, and just be ready to represent all those people around you. But certainly you can make it easy for yourself by preparing everything that is in your control, and that being your CV, of course. Very happy to chat about sort of goals, milestones, timelines, all that sort of stuff in the breakout room. So thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Labrom, for that very detailed presentation on tackling orthopedic surgery. And hopefully everyone has taken away the importance of knowing your destination and journey. So for now, this wraps up the main part of the event. Thank you once again to Dr. Josh Kovoor, Dr. Aashray Gupta, and Dr. Fraser Labrom for their wonderful presentations.